All right, welcome everyone. My name is Jackie Porter. We're here to talk about a new thing we're running to help product managers think about availability of GitLab.com. We're using error budgets as a product performance indicator. We're conducting an AMA on this and starting with the first question. Victor isn't on the call right now, but I'll go ahead and voice over. Could we see a recorded walkthrough on how to use the Grafana dashboards? I've checked out the configure dashboard and I see that our budget was already spent. But after 5 minutes of staring at the dashboard, I could not figure out whether the budget was spent because of request errors or slow response times. Rachel has went on ahead and pre-filled in an answer here. And I don't know if she's on the call or if...
Yes, I'm on the call.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say we do have an issue that's open for this to help the stage groups be able to have better visibility on how their budget is being spent. Bob recorded an investigation for configure, and what is shown on the video there is quite manual. So we're working towards having that available in the dashboards, just so that it's much easier to consume that information and easier to dig down and to see where the budget could be spent.
Yeah, and in slide 9 of the deck that we've created, you can always submit an issue to do a review request for the scalability team to help you dive deeper into recommendations on how to mitigate these issues as well. Nicholas.
Yeah, so my question was around 500 errors, and I guess they count against the budget. And I looked at the activation request logs, and there was like someone who is trying to attack us with introducing like malicious code, which is like raising a 500 error. And yeah, this was my question, like how do we deal with like 500 errors that are not like really a bug, but something that is user like introduced by users intentionally.
Bob, I see that you have a response to this.
Yeah, the idea would be like it's completely normal to sometimes forget something like that, to forget to handle something like that. But a 500 could indicate to an attacker that we are having a problem, and that could mean that they try harder. So in that case, as I mentioned, it would probably be better to handle the error correctly and return a 400 something response rather than a 500 something.
Makes total sense. It's a fair point in this case. I also think that it's a good idea to have this KPI still, because we are more aware of the errors than before.
Sarah, over to you.
My question was, you have tips for product managers in terms of prioritizing improvements when they are over their error budget. And I just followed up to say, I imagine this will be a negotiation between PM and EM in those situations. And you added some helpful tips.
Yeah, so I really like this question. Thank you for adding it. We have added a portion of the product processes handbook, which is called SaaS First Framework. Big shout out to Andrew and the product team in the infrastructure section. And this adds guidance around availability, infra-dev issues, performance, and enterprise features, which should be prioritized in order to tackle some of the major underlying error budget drivers. So that part of the handbook would really help you address some of the budget spent portions of your error budget. There's more details definitely in that handbook page, and if you have any other questions about that, you can definitely ask them here. And Bob, follow up.
Yeah, that also, I think, answers Kenny's next question a little bit. But when you see that there's budget being spent that's over the past 28 days, so if that included an incident or something, then it might be good to dig a little bit deeper into what caused the budget to be spent. If that was like a single hour of problems, because one of the external dependencies that your feature relies on counts on, then it might not be the best thing to look at first, but rather the things that were going wrong the entire month. So in that sense, it's also good to know that more popular features like endpoints that have more requests or very frequently executed sidekick jobs, stuff like that, will have a greater impact on the error budget spend.
Cool. And then I just commented, and thanks for updating, Sarah. I think discussion is probably the more appropriate word. I imagine there's a lot of discussion about, well, what could we do to improve this? But then I think product can appropriately prioritize, hey, it's really important that we improve the experience of this endpoint that is degrading the overall experience for our .com customers against, whatever other business requirements there might be, and appropriately do so. But yeah, I would imagine there's going to be need for some help in figuring out what could we do to improve that experience.
And I think, and I'll add this after I say it out loud, which is in terms of prioritization, we just talked about opening a request for help in interpreting those errors. So I think as we start using this and make it part of our workflow, we might have a few more of those when we realize that we're over budget as a product group. We open a request for help interpreting and perhaps getting recommendations on what we could do to best mitigate that. And thanks, Jackie. So I think that'll help we'll get some initial support in that discussion to help mitigate that.
We have also set an OKR inside of the scalability team to produce some suggestions for the teams that are most over budget. So to go through the dashboards and come up with some suggestions, raise those issues and bring them to the attention of the product and engineering managers for the specific groups, just to try and provide a little bit of a start.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel.
Rachel, on that, sorry, this is Kai. The code review is, I'm guessing, one of those that's very high. It's at 5 hours, which seems high already. I was in the process of opening a review request. Should I just do that to start the process, or is it something that you were going to do naturally and there's probably already an issue to dive into that one?
If you're already keen on getting started with taking a look, then please do raise an issue, because it just helps us see who's ready to engage with us. What we found when we were doing the engagements, when we introduced the dashboards, is some teams had the bandwidth to look at the things at the time, and other teams we had to wait. So if your team is ready and has the bandwidth, by all means, go ahead and raise the issue, and then we'll be able to start with you and then get to the next teams as we get there.
Okay, thanks.
I have the next one unless anybody else wanted to continue on that topic.
Sarah, if you don't mind, I just want to mention something to Kai. Don't get afraid. 5 hours sounds a lot, and it is, but that doesn't mean that all of the work will be on your side. This is why we want to start this discussion and have a bridge where we can talk about things. So sometimes it will be on the product team to prioritize some things, but other times it will be a discussion of maybe we need to change what we are measuring. Maybe we are measuring things wrongly, so we'll change how we measure things, and ultimately that will change, the error budget, but also it will change how the service overall looks like, right? Like what our availability score is. So this is going to be a longer alignment process where, it's not only features that are need fixing, but it's going to be like the overall platform is going to get a bit stronger that way.
And see, 11 over, so don't worry. It's not just you.
One thing that we also haven't done, like the categorization, that's an answer to Sarah's question number 5 in the doc as well. We've done a first pass of adding categories to all endpoints and sidekick jobs and stuff like that, but it's very likely that we made mistakes. So if you see something that is attributed to one of your categories but isn't, sorry, but yeah, those will need to be fixed as well.
So
yeah, I
can
appreciate
go.
that. I'm not super concerned about the time on it, more trying to understand it as we've got other work related to performance, and I'm sure these are impacting that as well. So this will be good data to have for us.
Awesome. Number 4 was something that I ask when I see us putting a lot of work into internal efforts for our own teams and development teams that we sell product for. I don't know the scope of work that went into this. So my question was, could we potentially productize and sell this? The immediate use case that comes to mind is for our self-monitoring category where we ship Prometheus and Grafana for people to keep an eye on their self-managed instances. This would be a nice out-of-the-box feature.
I agree with you, like fiercely. So I feel like Andrew Newgate would be a good person to like pick their brain on productization of this feature.
So there's an effort underway to build. So the first thing is the complexity around this is that you need SLOs in order to do this, and SLOs are a remarkably complicated thing to build. However, there's an effort at the moment that will probably be maybe announced, I can't say too much about it, in a few weeks' time, to build a standard for all of that. And once we have that, then we can give our customers like a specification of how they want to define their SLOs, and they can generate it and they don't get vendor lock-in. And then on the back of that, we can consume that and build the error budgeting product around that. But the first thing is that you need the SLOs. And, you know, if you go look in our runbooks repository where we generate our SLOs, there's, you know, many thousands of lines of JSON, and probably more than that, in order to get all of that stuff in place. And obviously we can't expect our customers to do that. So once we have the spec for service level monitoring and an open way of doing that, that'll be easier. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think I captured everything you said. So if you read what I typed, just feel free to correct it. Thank you. And my last question on this, is this something that the product teams are going to need to maintain? This team did an awesome job of getting us set up and enabling us. I imagine that as we add more to the product, we'll need to make sure that the errors from those areas are being captured and considered. Bob.
Yeah, so we did an initial pass, like I mentioned, and we might have gotten some things wrong, but from now on, it would be required for new teams adding endpoints, adding sidekick jobs to add a feature category to them. And if they don't, the specs will fail. So like people will remember about it, and it's just adding like a single line to the code, and then it should be done.
Thank you. And Kenny, yeah.
Yes, so my follow-up question was, I noticed in the document there's kind of a assertion that today we're setting the SLOs for the budget kind of across the board, but we wanted to encourage more ownership by product over the definition of those SLOs. I would imagine that takes the like components to defining that SLO are what endpoints are involved, what the like expected aptX timing for that endpoint is, and then maybe there's some scoring that's the blend of those. Today, I imagine we're just averaging and have the same expected response time for each endpoint, but for product groups that want to take more ownership of that, where do they get started?
So some groups have already engaged with us. Like the best thing would be to create an issue in our, can be the scalability issue tracker or the infrastructure issue tracker. We have worked in the past with the package group on defining separate thresholds, for example, for the container registry to have different kind of monitoring for different endpoints that do different things in the container registry. Uploads take much longer than single gets and so on. So I don't think we have anything set in the handbook for this, but if you have teams that have ideas, like definitely reach out to us.
Cool. Yeah, I think I was pulling on that thread that Maren said, which is like we're trying to make the system more robust, and I think product should help define, you know, what those terms are. Bob, I used probably the completely wrong terms, but you were using some correct terms. Is the correct term aptX threshold or just threshold for the endpoint?
I mentioned threshold here because we were specifically talking about the threshold of which request is successful. So the aptX is measured as a duration, and it's either good or bad. If it's over the threshold that we set, then let's say it was 1 second, that would count as like a bad request and a bad aptX measurement.
And then is there a term for what I was describing, which is the like weighting of individual endpoints to accumulate to that aptX score? I think this is something I know we do in our overall SLA for GitLab.com. We weight various endpoints, but is that, Andrew, you're shaking your head now.
No, the weighting is purely on the number of requests. So there isn't, so if you have two endpoints, right, and one of them gets 5 requests a second and the other gets 100 requests a second,
Okay.
then it'll basically be like the out of 105 if you want. So it's naturally weighted by the RPS, which is a pretty fair way of doing it.
Yeah, okay, great, that makes sense. So yeah, it's naturally weighted by the popularity of that endpoint, which is probably what we want it to be. Cool, thank you. That's clarifying.
Question, Kenny, is your note on DRI for setting expected response times answered there? We kind of like went around
yeah,
it.
sorry. I think it was answered because you pointed me to the part of the page that I hadn't got to, which explicitly says do the dry start.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess let me just state this verbally. I guess what I'm hearing is that's the current set of DRIs, but we would expect this to evolve to where product has more ownership of the actual threshold setting if they want. That's what I heard. So,
okay,
Kenny,
cool.
in some future utopian world, I would love it if, in the same way that we specify the feature category, like in the code, and we say this endpoint belongs to this feature category, you would almost say this is the threshold, the latency threshold, and it's totally kind of baked into the code, and there's no kind of coming over to the infrastructure side to get that done. But that's like a future. That's what I put in that service level monitoring V2 proposal from long ago. That's sort of a bit stagnated at the moment, but that's where we would want to go with that, where it's totally hands off for infrastructure and it's owned by the product teams.
yeah, and I guess let me assert this. That is maybe a bit of like a technical challenge to set that up, but I'm trying to also state I want products to be very focused on those threshold numbers and be the drive for set, like however we set them. If it's manually, we communicate that to the infrastructure team, or there's some automated system. I'm suggesting products should be very should be the owner of what we want that experience to be.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more.
All right, looks like we're at the end of our agenda. Anything else?
Thanks, team, for getting this set up. That's great.
Yeah, big shout out to Rachel, to Marin, to Bob. Y'all have been such great partners. And then Andrew gave some really great feedback in the deck. So thank you, everyone.